James never thought it would happen to him. He was just living life, enjoying every pleasure the world had to offer. Sex was his escape, his thrill, his addiction. It started as something harmless, or so he thought. But what seemed like freedom quickly turned into chains. The more he indulged, the emptier he felt. Night after night, new encounters, new faces, but the same sinking feeling afterward. A feeling he couldn't shake. A voice in his mind whispering, "Is this all there is?" Then, something terrifying happened. At first, it was just a dream, dark, suffocating. He saw himself drowning, reaching for something, anything, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. When he woke up, his heart was pounding. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling stayed with him. And then, the signs started appearing. A series of events so strange, so unexplainable, that he couldn't ignore them anymore. It was as if something, or someone, was trying to get his attention. That's when he came across Padre Pio. At first it was accidental, or at least that's what he told himself. But the more he read about this holy man, the more he felt exposed. The soul that surrenders to the desires of the flesh is trapped in a prison it cannot see, Padre Pio once said. And for the first time, James realized he was in that prison, a prisoner of his own desires, blinded by sin. Then, suddenly, he stopped. Just like that. He didn't plan it. He didn't expect it. But when he did, something miraculous happened. Something so powerful that he never could have imagined it. His life took a turn he never saw coming. What happened next will shock you. It will make you question everything. Because this story isn't just about James. It's about you. About all of us. The battle he faced is the same battle millions are fighting right now, trapped in a cycle they can't break. But there is a way out. And what James discovered might just change everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened to James and why it matters to you. And if you've ever felt trapped by a sin you couldn't escape, tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced something that felt like a sign from God? James never set out to be controlled by his desires. It all started so subtly, so innocently. A glance, a thrill, a moment of excitement. What was the harm? He was young, full of life, and the world told him to chase pleasure. It was everywhere, woven into movies, music, and conversations. He heard the same message over and over. Do what makes you happy. And for a while, he believed he was happy. Every night brought new experiences, new encounters, new promises of satisfaction. The thrill of the chase, the rush of desire, it was intoxicating. It gave him a sense of power, of control. He told himself he was just enjoying life, that he wasn't hurting anyone. But deep down, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, something gnawed at him. An emptiness he couldn't explain. At first, he ignored it. He told himself it was normal, that everyone felt this way sometimes. But as time went on, the feeling grew stronger. The highs became shorter, and the lows stretched longer. The rush of excitement that once drove him now felt dull, lifeless. It was never enough. He always needed more intensity, more experiences, more distractions. And yet, the more he fed his desires, the hungrier they became. Something was wrong. He started to notice strange things. His reflection in the mirror didn't look the same. His eyes seemed darker, more hollow. He felt exhausted, drained in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. He avoided silence, filling his days with noise, distractions, anything to drown out the nagging voice in the back of his mind. But the voice refused to be silenced. Then the nightmares started. At first, they were vague, fleeting. He would wake up feeling unsettled, but he couldn't remember why. But soon they became more vivid, more terrifying. He saw himself lost in a vast, endless darkness, reaching for something, anything, but there was nothing. Just an abyss stretching forever. And in that abyss, a presence, watching, waiting. He would wake up gasping for air, his heart racing, his room feeling colder than it should have been. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. He told himself it was just stress, just his mind playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew. He knew something was trying to get his attention. Then the whispers began. Not voices, not sounds he could explain, but thoughts that didn't feel like his own. Moments of doubt, of fear, creeping in at the strangest times. A cold sensation, running down his spine in the middle of a crowded room. The feeling of being watched when he was alone. His once confident steps now felt uncertain, hesitant, and then, the strangest thing happened. One night, after yet another fleeting encounter, he found himself sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. He should have felt satisfied. He should have felt victorious, but all he felt was nothing, a hollowness deeper than anything he had ever known. He ran his fingers through his hair, exhaling sharply, trying to push the feeling away. But then, as he glanced up at his nightstand, his eyes locked onto something he hadn't seen in years. A crucifix. It had been a gift from his grandmother when he was a child, something he had long since abandoned. But now, in the dim light of his room, it seemed to stare back at him. A weight settled in his chest, heavy and undeniable. For the first time in years, he asked himself a question he had been too afraid to face. What if I'm not in control anymore? What if this wasn't just a habit or a lifestyle or a phase? What if something was feeding on his weakness, keeping him chained to this endless pursuit of pleasure? What if the emptiness he felt wasn't just in his mind, but in his soul, and then a terrifying thought hit him like a wave? What if I can't stop? At first, James thought he was in control. He could stop whenever he wanted. At least that's what he told himself. He convinced himself that he was just enjoying life, that he was doing what any man in his position would do. And yet, the more he indulged, the less control he seemed to have. What used to excite him now barely stirred anything inside him. It wasn't enough anymore. He needed more. More thrill, more risk, more distractions. He would tell himself that this time would be different, that this time he would feel something real. But every night ended the same way. An empty bed, an empty heart, and a hollow feeling that no amount of pleasure could fill. He could sense it deep inside him, something gnawing at his soul. But he refused to acknowledge it. He drowned it out, with more indulgence, more temptation, more excuses, and then without even realizing it, he started to change. He became restless, irritable. Things that used to bring him joy felt dull. Conversations with friends felt forced, empty. He stopped answering calls, started avoiding people who knew him well enough to notice that something was wrong. Relationships that once mattered to him now felt like obstacles. He couldn't be bothered with deep connections. They only slowed him down. He needed his fix. And he needed it now. But no matter how much he chased after it, it never satisfied. The cycle repeated, night after night. The more he indulged, the more he craved. And the more he craved, the deeper he sank into a darkness he couldn't explain. He started losing track of time. Days blurred together. Work suffered. He made careless mistakes. His mind felt scattered, unfocused. At times, he could barely recognize himself. And then, the nightmares returned. But this time, they weren't just bad dreams. They felt real. Too real. The darkness wasn't just in his sleep anymore. It followed him. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, feeling like something was in the room with him. A presence he couldn't see, but he could feel. The kind that made the air feel heavy. The kind that sent a chill down his spine even when the room was warm. He tried to ignore it, until one night, when he woke up unable to move. His eyes darted around the room, but his body refused to respond. He could hear something. A whisper. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside his head, cold, slow, deliberate. It spoke no words, and yet he understood it perfectly. You are mine. Panic surged through him, but he was trapped. Seconds felt like hours as the weight pressed down on his chest. He couldn't breathe. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He sat up, gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. His room was exactly the same, silent, undisturbed, yet he knew something had changed. He wasn't alone. He never had been. At that moment, a terrifying thought consumed him. What if this wasn't just in my mind? What if something is feeding off of me, something that doesn't want me to stop? And that's when the fear truly set in. Because if that was true, then stopping wouldn't just be difficult, it would be impossible. This is where many people find themselves trapped. The things they once controlled now control them. It starts as a choice, but before they realize it, that choice becomes a chain. A prison they never saw coming. Have you ever felt like you were losing control of something in your life? Like the more you tried to satisfy it, the emptier you felt? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. James tried to shake the feeling, to convince himself that it was just stress, just exhaustion. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just about his habits anymore. Something else had taken hold of him, and it had no intention of letting go. James had never really looked at himself before, not like this. He had glanced at his reflection a million times, fixing his hair, straightening his collar, making sure he looked his best before heading out into the night. But this time was different. The man staring back at him wasn't the confident, charming figure he imagined himself to be. His face looked hollow, his eyes sunken, lifeless. Something was missing, something vital. And for the first time, he couldn't look away. Sick feeling twisted in his stomach. He had just come back from another night of indulgence, another fleeting encounter that promised excitement, but left him feeling emptier than ever. The thrill was gone, the satisfaction non-existent. It was as if he had spent years drinking from a poisoned well, hoping it would quench his thirst, only to realize that it was making him weaker with every sip. He leaned closer to the mirror, studying his own face like he was searching for something, anything familiar. But all he saw was a stranger, someone he didn't trust, someone he didn't even like. He exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the sink. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Something was wrong. It had been wrong for a long time, but he had refused to see it, until now. And then, something unexpected happened. A shadow flickered behind him, a movement so fast, so subtle that he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Almost. His breath caught in his throat. He turned sharply. Nothing. The room was empty, but the air felt thick, charged, like something unseen had just passed through. The feeling made his skin crawl. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it, but a chill ran down his spine. A voice, not audible but clear, surfaced in his mind. You don't belong to yourself anymore. The thought hit him like a blow to the chest. It wasn't his own. It had come from somewhere else, somewhere dark. His hands trembled. He ran them through his hair, trying to silence the fear rising inside him. But deep down, he already knew. He had given himself away, piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. He had let his desires consume him until he wasn't sure where they ended and he began. He thought he had been in control, but now, looking at himself, feeling the weight of unseen chains tightening, around his soul he realized the truth. He had been deceived. This wasn't freedom. This was captivity. The pleasure he had once chased had become his master. It whispered lies, promising happiness, but always leaving him starving for more. And with each indulgence, something inside him had withered, something he couldn't name, but could feel slipping further and further away. His soul. A sharp pain shot through his chest. It wasn't physical, but it was real. A crushing heaviness, like something unseen pressing down on him, suffocating him. And then, images. Flashes of his life played in his mind, moments he had ignored, warnings he had brushed aside. His mother's voice years ago telling him to be careful. the concerned look of an old friend who had tried to talk to him before he cut them off, the quiet guilt that had stirred in him after every encounter, growing louder and louder until it was impossible to ignore. And then, another image. Padre Pio. James didn't know why. He hadn't thought about him in years. But suddenly, there he was, as if summoned by something beyond his understanding. He could see the piercing eyes, the intense gaze that seemed to look right through him. And then, a phrase surfaced in his mind. A phrase he had read once, long ago, and forgotten. The devil does not fear the disciplines of the body as much as he fears the purity of the soul. His stomach twisted. Had he been feeding something dark without realizing it? Had his surrender to desire been more than just a personal failure? Had it been an open door? The thought sent a wave of cold terror through him. He stumbled back from the mirror, his breath coming in short gasps. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if something beyond his sight was watching, waiting. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. Afraid of what he had become. Afraid of what had taken root inside him. Afraid of what would happen if he didn't do something. Now. James had never felt comfortable in churches. He had been in a few over the years, mostly for weddings or funerals, but he never stayed long. There was something about the silence, the way the candles flickered, the faint scent of incense that lingered in the air. It unsettled him. But tonight, he had nowhere else to go. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors, stepping inside cautiously. The vastness of the space swallowed him, making him feel small. The dim lighting cast long shadows on the stone walls, and the echo of his own footsteps felt intrusive, like he didn't belong there. He hesitated, glancing around. The church was almost empty, except for an elderly woman kneeling near the front, whispering prayers under her breath. James didn't know what he was looking for, but something deep inside urged him forward. His gaze fell upon a small bookshelf near the entrance. He wasn't sure why he approached it, but his fingers instinctively reached out, brushing against an old, worn book. The cover was simple, unassuming, but the name printed on it sent a strange chill down his spine. Padre Pio. He had heard the name before, but he knew little about him. Something in him resisted. He almost put the book back, but a force he couldn't explain compelled him to open it. His eyes scanned the pages, and then, there it was. A sentence that struck him like lightning, cutting through all the lies he had told himself for years. The soul that surrenders to the desires of the flesh is locked in an invisible prison. His breath caught in his throat. An invisible prison. That was exactly how he felt. Chained, trapped, a prisoner to something he had once believed was freedom. His hands trembled as he turned the page. He read about men who had come to Padre Pio, weighed down by sins they thought they could never escape. Men who had convinced themselves there was no way out, until they met him. He had seen into their souls. He had told them the truth, no matter how painful. And he had shown them that no darkness was greater than God's mercy. James felt something stir inside him, a mixture of fear and hope. His mind raced. Was it possible? Could he really change? Was there truly a way back after everything he had done? His legs felt weak. Before he realized what was happening, he collapsed onto a pew, his hands gripping the book as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. And then, for the first time in years, he prayed. It wasn't a perfect prayer. It wasn't poetic or well thought out. It was raw, desperate. God, if you're really there, help me. The words barely escaped his lips before a wave of emotion crashed over him. His chest tightened, his throat burned, and tears, hot, unstoppable, spilled down his face. He gritted his teeth, trying to suppress them, but it was useless. He had spent years running, years pretending he didn't need help, that he was in control. But now, kneeling in the quiet of the church, he realized how lost he truly was. And, for the first time, he wasn't afraid to admit it. The weight on his soul didn't disappear in an instant. The chains didn't break with a single prayer. But something had shifted. A crack in the darkness. A whisper of hope. For the first time, James wasn't just searching for the next thrill, he was searching for the way out. James had thought that the hardest part of his journey was realizing the truth. He believed that the moment he cried out to God, the chains would break and the darkness would lift. But he was wrong. The real battle had only just begun. At first, he felt a newfound strength. He left the church that night with a determination he had never experienced before. He swore to himself that he would change, that he would never return to the life that had nearly consumed him. But he quickly learned that desire doesn't simply vanish, it lingers, it whispers, it waits. The first few days were unbearable. His body ached with a longing he couldn't control. His mind was flooded with memories, temptations, and the illusion of pleasure that had once ruled his life. Every night was a war. Battle between the man he used to be and the man he was trying to become. And then came the voices. You can't change. It's too late for you. This is who you are. Stop fighting it. James had never been a deeply spiritual man, but he couldn't deny the weight of these thoughts. They weren't just feelings. They weren't just temptations. It felt as if something unseen wanted him to fall again. One night, exhausted from the struggle, he sat alone in his apartment staring at the floor. He could feel the old urges creeping in, tightening around his soul like a noose. He had been doing well, praying, reading about Padre Pio, avoiding the people and places that had led him down the wrong path. But now, he felt weak again. What's the point? He thought. I'll never be free. And then, almost instinctively, his eyes landed on his nightstand, where he had placed the book about Padre Pio. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, flipping through the pages. His heart pounded as he came across a passage he hadn't noticed before. If you have the courage to begin, you have the courage to win. His breath caught in his throat. Was this his test? Was this what it meant to fight for his soul? Not to never fall, but to never stop getting back up? He shut the book and fell to his knees. He prayed, harder than he had ever prayed before. God, I don't want to go back. I don't want to be a slave anymore. Help me. And then, peace. Not the absence of temptation. Not a miraculous erasure of his struggles, but a peace that whispered, keep going. James didn't expect the road to be easy after that, and he was right. Some nights he still felt the pull of his past. Some days he questioned if he was strong enough. But he learned something that changed everything. He didn't have to rely on his own strength. He started fasting, not just as a religious practice, but as a way to discipline his body, to train his desires. He prayed every morning and night, even when he didn't feel like it. He surrounded himself with people who truly cared about him, cutting off the toxic relationships that had once fueled his downward spiral. And slowly, the chains that had bound him for years began to loosen. But there was one final realization that changed everything. For so long, James had believed that his desires defined him, that he was powerless against them, that fighting them meant depriving himself of something essential. But then, one day, as he sat in a quiet chapel, staring at the crucifix, the truth finally hit him. He had spent his whole life chasing pleasure, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside. But the emptiness had never been about pleasure. It had been about love. He had been searching for something eternal in things that could never last. That night, James made a vow. Not just to resist temptation, not just to avoid falling into his old ways, but to replace the false love he had been seeking with real love. He devoted himself to prayer, not just to ask for strength, but to grow closer to God. He started doing acts of charity, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to love others the way he had always longed to be loved, and something incredible happened. The emptiness began to fade. The desires that had once controlled him started to weaken, not because he had become stronger, but because he no longer needed them. James had spent years as a prisoner, believing he was free. Now, he was truly free, because he had finally surrendered to the one who could truly set him free. And now, here's a question for you. Have you ever felt like you were fighting a battle you couldn't win? Like no matter how hard you tried, something kept pulling you back? Let me know, because maybe, just maybe, your story isn't over yet. James had spent years trapped in a cycle of fleeting pleasures and deep regret. Every attempt to break free had felt like a losing battle, every fall convincing him that true change was impossible. But then, something happened, something he never saw coming. It wasn't sudden like a lightning strike. It wasn't a dramatic moment where all temptation vanished in an instant. It was something quieter, something deeper. One morning, as James was getting ready for the day, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For years, he had avoided looking too closely. He didn't want to face the emptiness in his eyes, the weight of his choices written in every exhausted line on his face. But today, something was different. His eyes weren't hollow. The restless energy that had always driven him from one indulgence to the next was gone. There was something else in its place. Peace. Real, undeniable peace. He set his hands on the sink, staring at his reflection, trying to understand what had changed. And then it hit him. The desires that had once dominated his every thought no longer held the same power over him. They had lost their grip. Not because he had fought harder, not because he had simply willed himself into holiness, but because his heart had been filled with something greater. The battle had always been about more than just resisting temptation. It had been about transformation. The more he sought God, the more he pursued real love, the more the old desires faded. They had been replaced, slowly but surely, with something far more powerful: purpose. James no longer lived for himself. He no longer searched for quick thrills to distract him from the void in his soul. That void had been filled by prayer, by acts of love, by surrendering his life to something beyond himself. One evening, as he walked through the park, he watched families laughing together, friends talking, children running with carefree joy. For the first time, he wasn't looking at life from the outside, he was living it. He remembered the nights he had spent in isolation, trapped in his mind, searching for something to numb the emptiness. Now, he found joy in the simplest things. A conversation, a quiet moment of reflection, the feeling of the wind against his skin. This was the life he had never imagined for himself, a life where he didn't need distractions, a life where he wasn't ruled by his past. And then, the miracle. One day, as James was volunteering at a local shelter, helping serve meals to those in need, an elderly man approached him. The man had kind eyes, worn by years of experience. He placed a hand on James's shoulder and simply said, "God has done something great in you. I can see it." James felt his throat tighten. For so long, he had doubted. He had wondered if the change was real, if he had truly left behind the man he once was. But in that moment, he knew. It wasn't just that the desires had faded. It wasn't just that he had broken free from his past. It was that he had been made new. He had never expected that walking away from sin would open the door to something so much greater. He had never imagined that surrendering to God would give him a joy deeper than any pleasure he had ever known. And yet, here he was, living proof that no matter how lost someone is, no matter how deep they've fallen, no matter how strong the chains may seem, there is always a way out. Because when God transforms a soul, it's not just a change, it's a miracle. James's journey was one that so many people can relate to, perhaps even you. A life driven by empty desires, the false promise of pleasure leading only to deeper emptiness. He chased fulfillment in all the wrong places, convinced that he was in control, until he realized that the thing he thought made him free had actually enslaved him. But the moment he stopped running, the moment he surrendered, everything changed. His battle wasn't easy. Breaking free from sin never is. The temptations still came. The struggles still weighed heavy. But instead of relying on his own strength, he turned to something greater. He sought the wisdom of Padre Pio. He devoted himself to prayer, fasting, and charity. And as he filled his soul with the things of God, the desires that had once controlled him began to fade, until one day, they were gone. That is the miracle. Not just the absence of temptation, but the presence of something far greater. A life of real love, real joy, and true purpose. And if James could experience this transformation, what does that mean for you? How many people are still trapped in the same cycle, believing they can never change? How many have convinced themselves that this is just who they are, that they are powerless against their struggles? But that is a lie. No sin is greater than God's mercy. No chain is stronger than His grace. If you felt this struggle in your own life, if you've ever battled against temptation and felt like you were losing, then let this story be a sign that freedom is possible. And this is just the beginning. If you want to go deeper into this transformation, if you want to understand how others have overcome similar battles, I have something for you. There's an entire playlist waiting for you, filled with powerful stories and insights that will help you break free and step into the life God has planned for you. Click on it now, because if you felt something stir in your heart today, that means God is calling you to something greater. And before you go, I want to hear from you. What part of James's journey spoke to you the most? Was it his struggle? His moment of surrender? Or the miracle of his transformation? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.